This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
Hello and welcome. We're very fortunate to have with us Professor Stiglitz, University Professor at Columbia University. He's been with the World Bank. He's a Nobel Prize winner in economics and lots of other details. Professor Stiglitz, you've been coming to India now often on your, I think I understand, your 10th trip or your 11th trip here. Are you finding major changes?
Of course. The first trip I came here was 1967, so it's 36 years ago. And there are big changes that have occurred in that period. Some gradual, some more rapid.
Well, in particular, over the last few months, there's been this feel-good factor which seems to have swept the entire country, as it were. I mean, the government's going to the polls based entirely on this feel-good factor that the Indian economy is poised on the verge of greatness. Do you buy that, or do you still think lots more needs to be done?
Well, I think a lot more needs to be done. I mean, obviously, things have gotten a lot better over the last 20 years, but the numbers of people in poverty remain very high. The growth rate, while it's been doing very well, 7%, some of that is because of a weak previous year, and growth rates that have been averaging 6–7% are not enough to really deal with the long-standing problems of India.
So you're saying it's the second highest growth rate in the world after China, but it's still not enough. It won't take millions of Indians out of poverty anytime soon.
It will take it a long time. Obviously, if they could get up to a regular 7–8% or 9% on a year-in after year-in basis, not a good year, then a bad year, and a good year, but a steady 7–8–9%, that would do enormous benefit. One of the problems of India is that parts of the country have been growing much more rapidly than others. Parts of the country have been at the rate of East Asia miracle, which shows what India's potential is. It could grow as fast as any country in the world, but then there are the parts of the country that have been lagging behind.
Well, I think one of the reasons I'm going on asking you about this feel-good factor is that I know when America was going through its feel-good phase, which was in the 1990s, you were somewhat skeptical, and you said that in a sense it's a bubble. So I think what I'm trying to ask is whether you feel there's a similar sort of a bubble taking place in India right now.
Well, one of the things I did point out in my book that just came out on the Roaring '90s was that there was a lot of froth on the American economy in the '90s. People felt very good, but underlying that, there were some very fundamental weaknesses in the economy. I don't think that's quite the same situation here in India today.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's not an artificial bubble. There is real growth. There was real growth, by the way, in the '90s in the United States. I mean, there were real achievements. The unemployment rate came down to 3.8%. That was a real achievement. There was new technology, the internet. That was an amazing change in the way people interacted with each other. That was a real achievement. But there was this excessively feel-good factor, this bubble, that when it broke, has left the United States for 3 years in a very, very weak economic situation. The United States has actually lost in the last 3 years almost 3 million jobs, when just to keep even with the new entrants in the labor force would have required 3 to 4 million additional jobs. So there's a 6 or 7 million gap.
Well, actually, one of the factors that's contributing to the feel-good factor in India, if it was to actually work, then the United States might just end up losing more jobs. This entire concept of outsourcing, of moving jobs, moving services to India, India becoming the services hub of the world, just as China is the manufacturing hub of the world. Do you think there's real promise in this basic paradigm or not?
Oh, I think there is real promise in this, definitely. The fact is that this is, I talked about the '90s, one of the great achievements of the '90s was the internet. The internet has linked the countries of the world together in a way that was unimaginable 20 years ago. And India is one of the first countries really now to seize hold of this new opportunity.
India, arguably one of the countries that would benefit the most of that communication and internet revolution bringing the world together, because now you can, any job which you can do in New York or Amsterdam or London, you can do it in India, theoretically.
That's right. There are many service sector jobs that won't be able to move. I mean, you're not going to be able to get your hair cut over the internet. Yeah. You're still going to want some face-to-face discussion. But for instance, today, if I call up at home and want to ask a question and I have trouble with my computer, I wind up talking to somebody in India. And it's seamless, it happens instantaneously, and it's a very natural consequence of the old theory of comparative advantage. In the past, you couldn't take advantage of that comparative advantage because of distance. The internet has basically eliminated that distance.